I was visiting my brother in Colorado Springs, and we were hiking on a trail up Cheyenne Mountain, which is where you'll find NORAD headquarters. As we were walking up the mountain trail, this very elderly woman, white hair, etc., came walking down towards us. My brother at the time was telling me how him and his friend saw some red orbs there late in the evening one day, and he said he really thought it was intelligent the way they were moving around. As we passed the old lady, she said, "You do see strange things on the mountain sometimes," and then headed further past us. We got about another half mile up the trail, and the same woman came walking from uphill and passed us again. We both just stopped stunned and watched her as she walked by. She tipped her hat and smiled, and then stepped into the woods.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Debriefed. My name is Chris Ramsey, and today we're going to be taking a little bit of a break from the Matilda McElroy story of the alien interview and this alien that they've captured at Roswell that told us that our souls are doomed prisoners that are stuck here for at least another 5,000 years. I thought we'd change it up a little bit. Now, two reasons behind that. One, I think if I keep reading the book, it just, at what point does it, become plagiarism? Like, I can't just read the entire book. It's definitely not my intellectual property, and it's not something I intended on doing fully. I wanted to kind of dive into some of the meatier parts of it, and I think we were able to do that. Now, if you want to know how the story turns out, definitely buy the book. It's something I've always left in the description. I encourage you guys to check it out and support the author, or at least his estate at this point. And I think it's time to move on to greener pastures, as they say. The second reason was I want to get into some other theories. I want to get into some other things. I feel like the longer we spend locked in on this singular idea of, this being a prison planet and these bodies being sort of these containers for our souls, which may or may not be true, by the way. I think the more time we spend away from other things that might also be true that we should be looking into. Namely, and one thing that I wanted to get into on this channel, I think probably more than anything at all, was the idea of talking to experiencers. And that's something I want to do more and more. The people that have really inspired me throughout this journey have been those who've worked, I think, closely with direct contact experiencers, or, otherwise known as abductees in some cases. People like Bud Hopkins, John Mack, David Jacobs, even Linda Moulton Howe. I think if you want to know what the inside of a UFO looks like, you could talk to people like Bob Lazar, or perhaps other people working on the Legacy program. Or maybe, just maybe, you can hear out some of the tens of thousands of accounts of people who say that they were abducted and taken aboard these crafts. I'm rereading the book Abductions by John Mack, who is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, and he really has a good grasp on, obviously, the human mind. And he's, I think, someone you can really reference when it comes to the abductions, especially, because he definitely tackled it from a skeptical point of view until he was faced with so much overwhelming human testimony and, anecdotal evidence, but also physical evidence of markings from these experiencers or abductees, that he was forced to broaden his worldview. And that's something that he really eloquently states in his book, is that there are three types of directions you can go when you hear these accounts from these people. One, ignore it completely. Two, try to fit it into the current model that we have going. And that seems to be what most people end up doing is, these people are just having a psychotic break, or experienced some physical trauma when they were younger, or are hallucinating, or have gone mad, or are making it up for money. This is how we fit that into our current model. Now, sometimes that might be the case. But when faced with so many cases of people who don't know each other, saying the same things that at the time were not reported on, were not publicly known or widely understood among, the public, these very, very niche ideas and, frankly, procedures that were being done, you're forced to do the third thing. You're forced to broaden your current model, broaden your perception of your world. You have no choice. And that's something that John Mack faced. He felt, with the overwhelming evidence, I think he had 100 cases over 3 years before he wrote this book. And he was convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was real. That we weren't just simply dealing with people who believed that it was real, that we were dealing with this being a reality. These people were of sound mind. Sure, some of them had traumas, some of them didn't. It wasn't a particular type of person. It was kind of all around the spectrum of human, as far as human characteristics and traits go. So really hard to pinpoint a psychological event on such a vast variety of people like that. You can't just paint it with a broad brushstroke. And so, yeah, he was forced to broaden his worldview and accept the fact that these instances of missing time, which is what he first got into with these individuals, was a result of some type of abduction by what seemed to be extraterrestrials. And today, folks, we are going to look at just that. Now, before we do, highly encourage you guys, leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, or leave us a review over on Spotify if you're listening to this. All of those things are free, and they help this channel immensely. So if you want to show a little bit of appreciation, just do that. You don't have to do anything more. And if you want to take it a step further, head over to our shop at area52.shop. We got some cool merch there that also directly supports us. Everything is shipped out of here, and we take great pride in the things that we do. And lastly, if you want to take it even further, you can go ahead and become what we call an intern, otherwise known as joining the membership either here or on Patreon, where you get extra episodes, weekly vlogs, access to the book club, access to movie nights, so much more. All right. I think we paid the bills. Let's get into it. Today, we are going to be looking at a very special case. This came out on Reddit 4 years ago. So 2021, there was a Reddit post under the subreddit known as r/abductions. And this person describes what they believe to be an abduction, and not only an abduction, but a Q&A with these aliens. They allowed him to ask questions, and he was allowed to retain the memories and have the answers.
Hey, sorry for interrupting. I accidentally keep calling this person a he. It's actually a she. I find that out later. I assumed it was a he. Don't know why. So small. Just ignore that. Ignore me. Go right back to sorry for the interruption. Couldn't let it slide. All right. See it.
Whether this is true or not is not up to me to decide, but I would highly encourage you guys to suspend your disbelief, at least for the next few, maybe hour or so. And let's give this a chance to make its way into our subconscious and see if this rings true for us and perhaps gleans any truth on the question, the broader question of ET contact. I'm feeling good today. This coffee's great. Everything's good. We're rolling here. The title reads as follows. My abductors helped me with my anxiety and saved my parents' lives so I can do a mission for them. Crazy bold statement. I'm hooked. I'm listening. I've been questioning as to whether I've been abducted for the past few days, especially after making a post about whether I've been abducted or not. But then, just as I was coming to terms that I was abducted and wouldn't remember anything, the aliens I met before came back. At this point, I feel obligated to share my story, so here it is. Okay, so let's just make a quick reference to the previous post in the same subreddit, coming out and saying, I think I was abducted. He details the time he saw a flying saucer, which we'll get into, and all of this. And then several days later, after posting that, apparently he was contacted and confirmed and given his memories back. Okay. Highly suspicious off the bat. I agree. But let's hear it out. Truth is often stranger than fiction. And I'm not going to dismiss it just yet. So let's keep reading. P.S. This is a bit of a long story, since it chronicles my entire abduction experiences up to this point. This isn't even getting into the absurd and possibly alien experiences that my family has witnessed. Regardless, this post will take a while, so be prepared to read. Oh, we're prepared. We've been prepared. PSS. I don't remember the exact dialogue. I simply restated the dialogue in the best I could remember. Fair enough. To start, my first abduction happened when I was 10, back in July of 2013. I snuck outside to my backyard to look at the stars, which I often did when I was young, since space has always fascinated me, even today. That was when I saw it. Through the couple of clouds in the sky that day, I saw the bottom of a saucer with its lights shining on me. Initially, I didn't remember anything after that. I woke up several hours later in my bed, just confused. But as discussed later on in the story, I was given my memories back, and I can describe what this abduction entailed. The next thing I knew, I was within a rather large room, which I could assume is within the saucer itself. Here's a recreation of what the room looked like. And this is pretty cool because we do have an instance here, just like Joe McMoneagle, the famous remote viewer, also was a really good artist. His renditions of his remote viewings were so precise and exact because of his artistic skill, that it really helped out with a lot of his work. But in this case, we do also have an artist. This person does digital art and is able to provide us with more than just some weird sketch. Like if I drew out maybe something that I'd experienced, it looked like a 2-year-old drew it, but this person has more skill than that. So here's the first image, and this is of inside the saucer. So we're looking at a pretty barren, large, white room, no real features to reference. Pretty much simple. Circular white room with nothing in it, and a single curve connecting the floor to the ceiling. Although there was no visible light source, it seemed as though there was light coming from the center of the floor and the ceiling. Once again, we find ourselves inside a barren, cold, almost lab-like environment. Very sterile, perfect for a procedure, if you will, but also echoes some of what the 4chan whistleblower was talking about when these things were built to spec. No extra things. There aren't any doors or any weird, there's no artwork. There aren't any stools just sitting around. Everything is there because it has a purpose. And if the purpose isn't to do anything extra, then those extra things are not there. They're not even there just in case. It's very mission oriented, it seems. There I was on a steel table, face up and paralyzed. 4 short grays around me, and we're using strange metal tools, mostly tools that looked like small steel rods, but they had a lot of them in their hands. If you're curious about how the grays look, they look very similar to the cover of the book Communion. As we all know, Whitley Strieber's famous book Communion, and typically that is a depiction of the grays. Now, it's interesting because the smaller grays in a lot of these books, especially David Jacobs, he touches on this quite a bit, in that the smaller grays seem very much sort of task-oriented and almost like they do the grunt work. Now, they still have the ability to be psychic, apparently, but they're the ones who will undress the abductee in a lot of these cases. Or if the abductee gets scared and accidentally, urinates on the floor due to sheer terror and fear, well, these guys are going to be the ones mopping it up, and they do that. And so they do all these little menial tasks, and then the taller ones usually come in for the proceduring. They moved their tools around my chest and stuck tools up my nostrils and ears. They also pointed green lasers at my eyes and stuck needles into my forehead. Very interesting. All things that you hear about, but never at once, so that is kind of interesting. The long rods, by the way, is definitely something that has existed. Now, what's interesting is that there's this old Gumby episode, and I think I've played this before in the past, where Gumby gets abducted. And it is your quintessential abduction scenario with the Greys. And they also say, we've exchanged abductions to help our future selves, and we've given you technology in exchange. Wildly deep episode of Gumby. But they do also hold this long rod, which I think Whitley touches on, I think there's a lot of abductees that talk about this rod and sticking things well up, people's nostrils. It hurt a lot. I was hyperventilating in pain, in confusion, in fear. It felt traumatic at first. But then all of the pain stopped when I heard it.
Calm down, my sweet child,
rang in my mind. It was a telepathic message. Through the wall, a tall gray phased through a floating white chair. She wore a long, long dress with the same shade of royal blue as the shorter grays. She was looking right at me. I knew the voice came from her somehow. Upon her saying that, all fear and pain washed away from my body. Even though there were tools and needles in my head at that point, I felt calm, happy, comfortable even. Now, this is very interesting because here we sort of, touch on a little bit of this female entity again that was described by Whitley Strieber and so many others. You have a taller, like gray that seems to be somewhat in charge, at least, of the procedure. It stayed like that for what felt like a couple more minutes. With me happy, the woman staring at me, and the 4 grays touching my head with tools. Eventually, though, the 4 grays stopped working on me. I, still paralyzed, suddenly started being lifted in the air. The bottom of the room lit up in a blinding light. And before I knew it, I was back in my backyard, except this time I was levitating in the air while the 4 grays before were nearby me. It was still nighttime when the grays walked towards my house. They opened my back door without even touching it and levitated both me and themselves through the house. Soon enough, they placed me in my bed, causing me to fall asleep. I woke up at 5 a.m., sleeping on my back in my bed while my sheets were straightened, which isn't normal at all. I normally sleep on my side and my sheets aren't straightened when I wake up. This is something that shows up quite a bit as well in abductions. You hear about people who've gone camping and suddenly wake up, their clothes are outside or their pants are on backwards or their shoes are on the wrong feet or their shoes have dirt on them and they're in their bed, like kind of a botched operation sometimes. They don't know exactly that we're creatures of habit and will recognize these things. Between my first and second abduction, I had nightmares. Repeated nightmares. Looking back, many of these nightmares depicted a distorted form of my first abduction. However, my memories were initially wiped of my first abduction, so I wasn't able to figure out the source of these strange nightmares. Oftentimes, my nightmares featured me being in a dark room, pursued by shadowy figures, and being entirely helpless. Interesting little moment here, because so many experiencers, whether abductees or whether just people who come in contact with these beings, sometimes they depict them having blurry faces or wearing a mask or being shadowy, almost like there is some type of psychic alteration that they're capable of doing. Like they don't actually have to wear a mask, that they can just change your perception of them in a way that distorts your memory of them. Everything changed, though, when I learned how to lucid dream at age 13. Being sick of nightmares, I searched for ways online to try to get rid of nightmares, and one of those things was lucid dreaming. For whatever reason, I picked up lucid dreaming absurdly quick. I had sleep paralysis, but only twice before I learned how to lucid dream nearly consistently. Within a month, I went from having constant, uncontrollable nightmares to having pleasant, lucid dreams almost every night. If you're someone out there that suffers from sleep paralysis, there definitely is a lot of literature on how to roll out of that, because you're essentially in the out-of-body state. You just don't know how to leave your body, so you're kind of confined and panicking. But apparently there's some work there that you guys can look into. I've never had sleep paralysis. I have had multiple out-of-body experiences, but I know that even those out-of-body experiences are terrifying, so I can imagine how much more so it would be if you couldn't move during that event. How you guys liking this so far? I think this is interesting. For unknown reasons, I also began to have dreams that predicted the future. Most often, they would depict a storm like a tornado or thunderstorm about 3 days before some of these storms appeared. I've also had dreams predict the bodies, but not faces, of people I would meet in the future and my relationship with them, most often friends. And even dreams predict rooms that I'd be in, despite me having never been in said rooms. These clairvoyant dreams happened once every couple of weeks, uncontrollably, and would feel stronger than a normal dream or even a lucid dream. Regardless, as time went on, I improved my lucid dreaming skills more and more over the next few years. As I grew to ages 14, 15, and 16, my control over my dreams became stronger and more effortless. Now that seems to track. If you're into lucid dreaming, it is something you can practice. There's work by a parapsychologist by the name of Rupert Sheldrake as well that really talks about how some dreams have precognitive elements in them, and that he encourages dream journaling, which is basically keeping a journal by your bedside, and any recollection you have of the dream, just write it down, because those memories fade pretty quickly, as I'm sure most of you know, and that if you jot down some of the elements that are present in these dreams, you might find that some of them might actually end up being precognitive, meaning they predict things that will happen. We've also seen precognitive events in out-of-body states. I made a 3-part series on the gateway and leaving your body. In the 3rd part, we talked to Graham Nichols, who left his body and during then witnessed an explosion on Old Compton Street in London. This was witnessed by 5 other people, that he told 5 other people about this. And then 5 days later, an actual bomb exploded at that very location, the pub that he said it was going to explode in. I don't dismiss the precognitive idea so quickly. This is going to be the forefront of science in a few years, I guarantee it. Then came my second abduction. I went to sleep on the night of April or May in 2019. I was 16 then. At the time, I had paper stuck in my right ear. A bit of a weird story, but I have a hearing sensitivity due to my autism. And before I chose to get noise-canceling headphones, I would block out noise by covering my ears with crumpled paper. One of the crumpled bits got stuck in my right ear though, so oops. Anyways, unlike last time where I was conscious on my trip from the craft, I simply appeared standing in a small corridor of sorts. At first, I tried to check if I was dreaming, which I do by attempting to manipulate the world, checking my hands to see if they look normal, etc. But to my surprise, it seemed as though I wasn't dreaming. To my left of that corridor was a wall of several switches, lights, and latches. It looked sort of similar to the front of a really old computer of sorts. Naturally, I didn't bother touching any of them. To the right were 2 short grays, standing there in the same blue jumpsuits that I saw them before. I felt terrified at first, of course, especially since I forgot about my first abduction at that point. But then I saw the tall alien I met before, telepathically saying the same things she said before.
Calm down, my sweet child, my sweet little child.
My fear washed away as the 2 aliens and I walked towards her. The room we were in looked exactly like my abduction room, except I had 4 beige doors that looked like this. These doors are capable of sliding upwards for someone to go through them. The 2 aliens took similar metal tools to the ones they used last time, although they didn't stick any needles into my head or anything. They just quickly moved the tools around my body. The gray on the right did notice something in my right ear, though, and reached in using these metal clamps to pull it out. My first thought was, "Who are you, and what am I doing here?" Which she responded with,
I am your watcher. I will answer your other questions later.
Now follow me, she telepathically said, and I followed her through a beige door that opened by sliding upwards. The window showed outer space. It looked beautiful, but it was more or less space. My watcher told me to look at her, which I followed obediently. Staring into her big, deep eyes, I can tell her eyes weren't just pure black, but were rather a very, very dark blue. Her skin was also relatively a bit more green compared to the other shorter grays I saw earlier. After staring into her eyes for a bit, she then said that,
Now you can see.
I looked back through the window and my goodness, it was space, but far, far more magical. It looked like your typical artist's painting you'd see when searching up HD wallpapers of space. But somehow, even better than that. It's like I could see red-like hues, green and yellow-like hues, and purple-like hues that were hues that you normally couldn't see in real life. My watcher told me that this is what I could see if I could master my mind. I then woke up, laying on my back with straightened sheets once again. At the time, I woke up with no memory of what actually occurred, although I did notice later that day that the paper stuck in my right ear was completely gone. In addition, in the following years, I would have lucid dreams where I could see colors I couldn't see in real life. I was never sure where these dreams came from or why they happened, at least not until recently. So let's pause here for a second. I do have a base theory running currently, or a hypothesis that I'm kind of putting together based on a lot of research and a lot of stories and everything else, and something really rings true to me, which I'll eventually get into more deeply once I've really rounded off, the jagged corners of this hypothesis. But I believe to a certain extent that we are interacting with a system, that we're not directly interacting with the intelligence behind the system, but that this system does have an intelligence, just not one like you or me. It's an automated system, I think. It's very procedural, and this system, could be around for many different reasons at the same time, including possibly manipulating or maintaining the, human presence on this earth, among so many other things, maybe even the flora and fauna and all sorts of other things. But I think that that's kind of maybe what we're interacting with 50% of the time is this system. This system has these beings, these genderless beings that seem task-oriented, that, do these mundane tasks. They also have these larger beings that seem a little bit more empathetic, that are able to psychically calm you down, that are almost there to reassure you constantly, so that the trauma perhaps doesn't affect, the test subject. If you go into an enclosure with a panda, a lot of times they dress up as pandas, not to alarm them, and they don't want to affect their natural habitat because they want that natural state to develop without their interference. And so maybe they're just trying to calm us down, right? And wipe our memories so that everything remains. And they've seen that, if they don't do that, there's trauma and it kind of affects the subject. But anyways, so really three things happen. Three things that happen across the board with the abduction concerning these type of extraterrestrials, in regards to this system. It seems like three things happen. One, you get taken and experimented on, and I don't mean experimented as in they don't know what they're doing. I mean, there are procedures that happen. There are a variety of procedures that seem to be the same among abductees, but different between male and female, troubling procedures that do happen. Number two, after the procedure is done, you're given a tour of the ship. A lot of times, people are given a tour of the ship and are shown beautiful things. Kind of what's happening right now. Even in the case of Chris Bledsoe, he was given the tour where he said he was in a bubble looking around. They showed him the pyramids. They showed him all these beautiful things on Earth. These tours happen across the board, again. And the last thing they do, and I don't know if that's what we're going to get into, but the last thing they do is they show you terrible things. They show you nuclear blasts and famine and war. And, if you go back to Rua, Zimbabwe, the children that witnessed, the 60 some odd children that had witnessed this craft land, these beings come out and they were, psychically shown these images of the world ending. And so many other abductees, again, including Chris Bledsoe, were shown these terrible things, as if saying, look what you're doing, smarten up, you need to change. It seems like that is pretty par for the course, and it seems like it might be an automated system at this point, because I think it's too frequent, and it gives nothing. I suppose it adds reassurance to the person who is taken, in that, hey, look, we're doing this for the greater good, and we're actually taking care of you. and sort of leaving you with not such a foul taste in your mouth. And perhaps to some extent justifying the terrible things that they're doing to us. Like, no, we're not the bad guys. You're the bad guys. We're just trying to help you. Here, look how bad you are. And then we kind of leave being grateful and thankful for the horrendous procedures that were just done and the fact that we were stolen out of our beds. You know? And so it does seem to be like some weird automated system. The second reason I believe that is because what has come from that? What has come from showing any of these people the end of the world? Nothing. These people they don't go on to, you know, change the laws or what they grow up to speak at conferences to other people who are interested in UFOs. Or they get so psychologically traumatized that they become reclusive and we don't hear about them. So surely they know that telling us these things won't change the world. Why continue to do it? Well, the answer is it's probably just programming. Hypothesis only. Sorry for that parentheses, that large parentheses. But this is something I've been thinking about quite a bit after reading, you know, a lot of books on it. And it does seem to match up in a certain way. But let's see what this gentleman, or I don't even know, is this male or female, what this person has to say. 3 years later, 19 years old, I was abducted about 1 a.m. on October 30th, 2021, when the third abduction occurred. At this point in time, I was beginning to research about the UFO and UAP phenomena out of curiosity for the past month. Over time, however, I began to piece together that maybe, just maybe, a lot of weird things that occurred in my life, from my nightmares to my family's experiences, and being able to see strange shadow entities, among other issues, was entirely because of me being abducted. As I was walking downstairs to get a midnight snack, I saw the tall alien, my watcher, standing right by my front door. Judging by the height of the door that I measured after the abduction, I could tell that she's about 7'2" or 7'3", so 2.18 to 2.21 meters tall. Despite seeing an unwanted being in my house, seeing her made me feel calm somehow, as I heard the same phrase I heard before in my head.
Calm down, my sweet little child.
Wanting to get evidence, I lifted up my phone, which was in my hand at the time, and rushed to turn it on. But the instant I even thought to capture her on camera, she vanished.
Come downstairs,
I heard in my mind. I came downstairs, albeit cautiously. I had my phone on to capture them on camera and was ready to yell to wake up my parents if anything bad happened. The second I walked into my kitchen, though, I saw 4 short grays I saw earlier, and my vision blanked out. My first thought was to check if this was a dream by checking if my hands looked normal and trying to manipulate the world around me. I'm a pretty good lucid dreamer at this point, so I figured out how to discern dreams from reality. Both checks, however, seemed to suggest that this was, in some way, reality. My watcher said,
look at me.
And I looked. As she stared into my eyes and I into hers, my forgotten memories of my past abductions came flooding back.
I am your watcher.
Her voice echoed in my mind.
But you can call me Mama.
After that, I felt dizzy for a bit. She continued to stare at me while I had to close my eyes. Over the next couple of seconds, a dozen thoughts a second rushed into my mind.
I answered all of your questions,
she said, telepathically in her soothing voice. I'll list these questions and answers towards the end of the post to let the story continue. She then told me through a separate telepathic message that
we're contacting you because your family has great psionic potential. However, your anxiety is getting in the way.
She lifted me up in the air without lifting a finger and moved me across the room onto her lap, cradling me like a baby.
Look at me again.
Looking into her deep, dark blue eyes, I heard her in my mind say,
calm down, my sweet little child. Or should I say, calm down, my sweet little girl.
I must have had a positive reaction to the latter because she started repeating,
calm down, my sweet little girl,
in my head over and over and over again. It felt soothing and euphoric, like I've never felt this comfortable in my entire life. Eventually, what seemed like hours, she said,
if you ever get scared or feel pain, just think of me, your Mama, okay?
The last words I heard before I fell asleep in her arms was, I need to learn astral projection next. We'll come back once you mastered that. Weird. The whole mama thing is super weird, but the whole, I guess the whole motherly feminine energy perhaps is something that they feel deep down. It's what would soothe us the most, is like the voice of a mother cradling you. I think that would be the best way to calm anyone down. I couldn't think of a better way of feeling more comfortable than the feeling of, your mother cradling you, telling you it's going to be fine. Interesting strategy here to calm down the human. Suddenly, I woke up on the couch in my family room at 2:30 a.m., which was weird since I didn't even enter my family room from my memory. This was especially weird since I usually sleep from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. or so. I'm never even remotely tired at this time. At first, I tried my best to dismiss what happened as a dream. It couldn't have happened, right? Wait, does this person sleep from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m.? They work the night shift or something? That's kind of a crazy sleep schedule, if you ask me. They did mention that they were autistic, so perhaps there's something there that leads them to be more of a nocturnal person. In addition, I suffered from daily headaches and body pains, which was diagnosed as fibromyalgia by a rheumatologist in February. Even though the headaches and pains have gotten better as I followed my doctor's treatment, these headaches and pains have never fully went away until this abduction incident. I have yet to have a headache or pain in my body since, and it's been nearly a week when I usually feel these pains daily. Well, that's interesting. The healing idea is something that comes up quite often as well. And again, I reference Chris Bledsoe because he's such a famous case, but there are so many other cases as well where people have felt that they've been either healed or cured of certain diseases. Here are the questions I asked my watcher and that she answered. Now we get into the Q&A, folks. Question: why did you abduct me? Answer:
We abduct your family line because you and your family have high psionic abilities. However, your relatives,
she showed an image of my dad and grandma in my mind,
have ignored the truth for religion. You're more open-minded.
Question: how long have you been following my family line? Answer:
237 years.
Question: why did my parents' car teleport? For context, my parents and I experienced our car teleporting to a completely different part of town while my dad was driving in May of 2015. Answer:
to save your parents' lives. If we didn't save your parents, this would interfere with your psychic abilities.
Whoa, that's crazy. There are accounts as well of people just driving, seeing a bright light or something, and then all of a sudden be driving in a different direction or in a different part of town or hours later. Betty and Barney Hill being a very famous case of that, but these things tend to happen pretty regularly. So if you've ever driven somewhere and had missing time, perhaps you were being saved. Why did you wait until now? Answer:
we knew you would come to the conclusion that you've been abducted. We waited until then, as well as you mastered your lucid dreaming.
Question: what is behind the 4 beige doors? Answer: the deck, the window, the pilot room, and the engine room. She made a map of what she believed the alien ship looked like. It's also really interesting because a lot of these ships, and this is very common once again, seem to manipulate space in a way that doesn't seem possible, where the inside of the craft actually appears to be much larger than the outside. Are there other rooms? Answer:
yes.
Can I see them? Answer:
no.
Question: what are you aliens? You grays? She's like, you grays, bro? Answer:
for as long as you live, we cannot tell you or humanity.
This was also the answer to many other questions regarding the nature of the universe, their technology, where they live, etc. For as long as you live, we cannot tell you or humanity. Does tie into the whole future us thing. What if the future us, right, needs to fix something in the past, but we can't do it because that'll affect the future us. That'll make them become us, which is what we're trying to fix in the first place, right? So instead, we make these aliens that look nothing like us so that we don't even come to the conclusion that that could be us in the future. And that actually the future us just looks like us. You know, much like what Travis Walton witnessed when he had these little guys working on him. When he fought them off, he ended up encountering these humanoid-looking people who, you know, for all we know, hired a bunch of grays, you know, to do, you know, the mundane work. What technology do you use? Answer.
EM.
Electromagnetism, I presume.
And psionics. You wouldn't understand if we told you.
This was also a common answer to many other questions regarding the nature of the universe, their technology, where they live, etc. Question, is religion real? Answer.
Yes, all are to some degree.
All right. Question, if you're a watcher, what other aliens exist? Man, these are great questions. All right. Kudos to the person who wrote this. These are fantastic questions. Answer.
There are watchers/observers. Those who reproduce, and others.
I personally call those who reproduce breeders. Question, would a reproducing alien abduct me? Answer.
No, that would interfere with your purpose. We specifically have you and your family marked to not reproduce with.
Question, what is my purpose? Answer.
To learn psychic abilities. You should also have children, preferably 3 or 4 if possible, given how well we predict you can handle children. But we won't force you to, since we know you don't want children. If you follow what we say, then this will be the best for both of us.
She then telepathically showed me clairvoyant visions, including a vision of what life career I should pursue. And it was an animator. What a future romantic partner of mine would look like, and a vision of me floating in space, seeing colors I normally couldn't see in real life. If I remember any more questions, I'll be sure to put them here. The psionic part is really interesting because this is 4 years ago. This is 2021, prior to a lot of the quote-unquote psionic talk we've been hearing about, you know, with Jake Barber and whatnot, and the whole Skywatcher thing. Yeah, I'd be curious to know where this person currently is, and if this person wants to reach out to me anonymously, I'd be happy to talk to them. Skepticism. I've tried telling a few friends and family some details on what happened, only to be met with skepticism. To be honest, even I don't fully believe what I experienced. Maybe it's right to be skeptical. Here's some skeptical points that I've seen others bring up. Okay, very forthcoming about skeptical, inquiry, which I think is very healthy. Perhaps all of my abductions were just extremely vivid dreams that seemed even more realistic than typical lucid dreams. Perhaps my parents' car teleporting is because my parents and I just coincidentally fell asleep on the wheel and drove to the other side of town somehow. Or we just drove to a completely different part of our city without all 3 of us noticing, somehow. Perhaps my anxiety, headaches, and body pain going away are just my mind's placebo effects. Perhaps me and my family seeing shadow entities or even straight-up aliens in real life are just hallucinations. Perhaps I have a mental condition I need to check out. To combat this point, I actually visited 2 psychologists regarding me seeing these strange entities in real life long before my 3rd abduction, and me even remembering my previous abductions. Both of them had me do tests to see if I had anything like schizophrenia, and both of them said that I'm perfectly sane. Yes, I do have autism. No, autism does not cause people to see this stuff, rather. Perhaps my family experiencing all of these things, and not just me exclusively, is just inherited by genetics or passing down culture. So, some of the skeptical points don't make logical sense to me, but hey, this alien encounter hardly makes logical sense, so honestly, believe whatever you want to believe. No judging. Heart emoji. I'm an artist, by the way, so if you have anything that I saw that you want me to sketch, I can definitely do so. I also have a myriad of stories of my father, grandma, great-grandma, and siblings have told me or passed down to me that might be related to alien abduction as well. I could post about those if anybody wants to see that. Edit, here's a sketch of the aliens and a sketch of what the UFO looked like from the bottom as well. First of all, I want to commend this person on coming out. If this is completely made up, fine. For what? 145 likes? Cool. All right. If this is real, commend this person. I think they're very brave for, even talking about it, even anonymously. I think is very difficult to talk about something that so many people would dismiss. Again, even anonymously. I think if you were to type this out and just like waiting for someone's response and it's just negative, 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 that affects you, right? As a person, even if no one else sees it, you're like, damn, this, kind of sucks that I can't put this out there and that people, will think I'm crazy. So good on them for doing that. I'm curious to know if this person has had any luck astral projecting, and wonder maybe if they've watched my documentary on astral projecting. Maybe that'll help. Yeah, it makes me now question the voice that I heard in my head on the last time, that I astral projected. Again, if you haven't watched that 3-part series, I highly suggest going to watch it. But on the 3rd part, as I was walking out of my body, leaving my room, broad daylight, by the way, I wasn't asleep. I was meditating, left my body, saw my body, go to my window, try to leave, and I hear a female voice as loud as this go, "What are you doing?" And the tone was more like, "What do you think you're doing?" But it was, "What are you doing?" And it was a female voice that I did not recognize, and it was coming from behind me, and I was like, ugh. And I kind of like froze in fear, saw my body, went back to my body, didn't look over there, just like kind of went back into my body, and then came out of my meditation. Sounds crazy, I know, but I'm not afraid to say what happened. Why would I be afraid to say what happened? Anyways, I'm just relaying what I perceived, and it makes me a little uneasy reading this because now I hear about this voice, this feminine, and now I'm starting to think, oh, wait, is astral projecting tied into the phenomenon somehow? And I always thought that it was, but never so directly. So it's kind of, interesting. Let's look at the pictures here. So a sketch of the aliens. I love how they're like kind of smiling. Well, at least some of them are. Not all of them. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the names I've given. I gave the 4 shorter grays that I didn't have names for. One was 5'3", so about her size. One was 5'9". One was 5'6", and one was 4'9". Okay, so they all had a little bit. They all seemed to have a little bit of a different feature. They didn't seem identical, which is cool. And then there was Mama, the Watcher, about 7'3". Very interesting. And blue seems to be the color that these aliens wear for some reason. Seems to be the garb that they chose. Why blue? That's interesting because blue is a choice. Could have been red, could have been yellow. Why blue? Why not white? Something neutral. Why blue? Did they think, oh, blue is a calming color for humans? Or they're just like, no, we like blue. Blue's sick. Blue's a nice color. Like, what was the actual decision behind blue? That bugs me. Whoa. Here is the bottom. This is a great picture, but here's the bottom of the craft. And I love how they included it sort of reflecting too with that big red light. That is super sick. This person then continued to answer a lot of questions. So she does say here, thanks for the luck with astral projection. I figured it's going to take a while to learn. And someone says, not as hard as you might think. Ever since my experiences, I found it pretty easy to do, to the point where I almost wonder if that's because of my alien experiences. Like they just made me super comfortable with slipping out of my body, like taking off an old boot. I detailed how to do it in my thread here, though I'm sure you're probably aware of this technique. She says, thanks for the info. It's interesting to read about your simple technique for astral projection. Thanks so much for linking your thread. I'll definitely try your technique out. This person then says, give it a shot. Just this past week, I had another astral projection experience, and this time it went a bit farther than usual. It's all about walking that tightrope between waking and sleep, between relaxation and concentration. The hardest part for me is that usually once I leave my body, or so it seems, I immediately start zooming forward at ridiculous speeds, and it just becomes kind of frightening, honestly. This most recent time, I started flying through space and eventually heard a strange, tinny voice, which said something like, "Please proceed to the lower levels." Then it said something about checking out the surface of the sun, and I woke up shortly thereafter. It was really weird. I don't blame people who think it's all a dream or whatever, but no matter what it is, it's distinctly different from straight-up dreams in my experience. Astral projection is just really bizarre, to be honest. It doesn't really make sense somehow. It's like an alternate reality, rather than simply being our own reality, but out of body. It's like Nowhere in Silent Hill, or the Upside Down in Stranger Things, the sort of offshoot imitation of reality. At least that's my experience. 1,000%. That is so well put, and that is definitely coming from somebody who's had out-of-body experiences, because the room is the same, but like an 80% match. It's either bigger or smaller or wonky. It's a little bit off. And again, I'm in a lucid state. I'm completely aware that my body is over there and that I just closed my eyes 20 seconds ago. Like there's no time delay. I didn't wake up in this thing. I went from meditating, taking my headphones off, closing my eyes, to instantly leaving my body. It feels like a weird upside down realm. And someone says, "I'm sure this is hardly ever said, but I envy you and your experiences." And she says, "I've heard some speak of envy regarding my experience. Truth be told, I wish some of this could be passed on to other people. At the very least, if they could give us some of their medical technology knowledge, such as whatever they use to heal my anxiety and depression, that would be wonderful, so as to have less people suffer in the world." You know, it is really interesting because we just completed, a giant 3-part read-through on this alien being named Errol, who said that our souls are trapped here and that when we die, we leave our bodies, but then we're sort of recycled back into this planet. The astral projection part of it comes up here, and then call that the soul or whatever you want, or consciousness or your spirit or whatnot, but it seems like that might be a key to all of this, and it might really explain the U.S. government's interest and the Chinese government's interest and the Russians' government interest into the parapsychological, extrasensory perception, precognitive experiences, psychic connections, telepathy, telekinesis, all of these amazing, seemingly impossible feats of the human mind are all potentially very closely, directly, and importantly related to the UFO phenomenon. And I think that's why folks such as Hal Puthoff, who started Stargate back in the day and other projects, are so closely tied to the UFO subject. I think that's why. I think because even the psionic stuff we talk about, I think the astral projection stuff we talk about, I think it all has to do with the phenomenon. And now, after reading the alien interview, you look at that book as fiction, but maybe there's something to it. Maybe it's not all real, but maybe there is something to it. Maybe there is some type of war or exchange going on, or some type of, containment here on Earth that houses the human spirit, and that, we need to sort of free ourselves doing through these astral projections. Who knows? It's fun to think about. Again, as I'm reading through a lot of the Q&A here with other people on Reddit and this individual, she keeps repeating on how skeptical she is. She keeps saying, "Yeah, I'm very skeptical about the things they told me. I'm skeptical about everything, and I think that's a really healthy way of approaching it. It's not someone who's trying to force this narrative down anyone's throat. They come to this particular subreddit, to be a little bit more vulnerable and open and, discussing possibilities of it not being, a real thing." A lot of people here talking about, past life and reincarnation. It gets, as soon as you talk about the soul's journey, we talk about so many other things here. It just really opens up the floodgates. So that concludes my read through for this particular post. Bit of a change of pace, I don't think we've really looked into the abductee experiencer stuff so much. A lot of times we've been looking into government documents or, whistleblowers. I think that this is definitely an important topic that we should be tackling. And it's something that I want to do a lot more of. And there is a catch-22 with approaching this particular subject. And the catch is, having experiencers come forward without anonymity will undoubtedly, at some point in their, it'll change their lives, right? Because people might start treating them differently, people close to them. And it's a very vulnerable thing. And on the other side of that, I never want to be exploitative of these people, because the last thing I want to do is monetize off someone's trauma. I'm fascinated by this, and I genuinely want people to understand that this is happening. All right, this isn't just a bunch of crazy people on Reddit. This is happening. There's a lot there. And if you decide to read the books yourselves and not ignore it or try to fit it into your own current model and expand your worldview by picking up some of these books and reading some of these accounts or speaking to people who've had experiences, you will quickly realize that we are dealing with something more profound and more authentic than you might be comfortable living with. I believe that there's a lot of stories out there that should be told. And I think that the audience that we're cultivating here, that we're fostering here at Area 52, for the most part, is the perfect audience to receive some of these people as well. Because I think a lot of you, and by reading a lot of the comments and engaging with you in the different channels that we have, seem to be very open-minded, accepting, loving, and not too cynical. And definitely, there's definitely trolls out there, but most of you, I think, have your hearts in the right place and are willing to at the very least, hear out what people have to say without judgment. And I think that suspension of judgment goes a long way with people who've experienced things. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. And folks, I will be at Contact in the Desert. I didn't want to film anything over there because I kind of wanted to let loose and just kind of hang out and meet people, which is what I'll be doing. But I'll also bring my camera in case, and I might just film a little something for you guys because I have nothing planned for the week that I get back. As you know, I film and edit all of these videos myself, and I might not have time to do that. So I might just put something together about my experience over there, or perhaps some interview. I don't know yet. But stay tuned for that. That'll be next week. And then in the month of June, we're going to have some more guests come back into the skiff, which I'm really excited about as well. So thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you. Hope you guys have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you on the next video. Peace and love.